Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our latest webinar. Graham and I have pulled together a whole host of content for you today. We're really excited to be sharing lots of tools, lots of practical things to help you, particularly when we're leading in what is arguably the toughest time to be a leader. So strap in, and Graham and I are going to take you through a journey with regards to that. Welcome, Graham, by the way.
Yeah, welcome everybody.
It'd be really cool if those that have tuned in could drop in the chat where you're from, because it's always nice to see how far and wide we reach. I think the furthest I've seen in recent months is Texas or somewhere like that, which is always really cool when we're reaching that. Not that I'm expecting Texas today, given the time of
Middle
day.
of the night for them, won't it? Right now.
It will be middle of the night. So we've got Steve from London. Welcome, Steve.
Welcome, Steve.
Okay, so we've got York, but not quite Texas. So morning, Helen. Welcome.
Hi, Helen. And yes, York's not quite. In fact, I've never been to Texas, but I have been to York. So
yes, I've been to York with you, actually, Graham.
Yes, we have. Yeah.
Steve, London's fine. We love London just as much. Please, absolutely, London is perfect as well. So let's dive in, because, like I said, we've got lots of content to share. What we would invite you to do is dip in, share any thoughts, any observations as we go. If you've got any questions, drop them in the chat. But if you could start that question, that text that you put in, with a Q, that helps Graham and I to find those questions really quickly, and we can tease those out. And there will be some time for Q&A at the end. So let's talk about the plan then. So today we're going to go through, why is it scary right now? Why does it feel quite tough, particularly for our teams and us as leaders? What change means for your people, why people resist change, and the secret step that will help you to move your team forward. And like I said before, we're going to have time for Q&A within that. So Graham and I will keep abreast of the of what comes through the chat, and we'll obviously tease out any of those questions as they come in. So
we need to also pop the slides up, Ricky.
Am I not sharing?
No, not at the moment.
How about that?
That's better. There we go.
There we go. So my apologies, little technical hitch there, because on my screen it suggested I was sharing. Well, here is the agenda as I've just outlined. Why is it scary? What change means? Why people resist it? And there's a secret that we're going to share as well. So stay tuned, and we'll unpack all of that for you. Let's for those who don't know anything about us, Thinking Focus, we're a behavioral change business. We put mindset at the center of everything we do, because we believe individuals and teams underperform. Now, that's quite provocative, but we don't mean they're doing it on purpose. What we mean is they'll have self-imposed limitations, assumptions, and beliefs that, when you combine them, create this treacle that they have to wade through in order to get stuff done. Organizations also add to that in the way that we do things. So we seem to make things a little bit harder than we need to. We help teams all over the world, and we're helping them to reframe the way they think. So you guys are the experts in the way you see your business, in the jobs that you do. We don't come in and pretend to know what the details are behind what you do. But what we do is we ask questions. We cause you to think. We cause you to think differently about different ways and different options. And we help you to get out your own way. We've been doing that since 2016. In fact, in just under 10 days' time, we will hit our 9th birthday, which we're really proud of. And in that time, we've helped over 12,000 participants, 170 organizations, And we've probably done over 6,000 hours of kind of one-on-one coaching, I think, Graham, would you say?
Yeah, I'd say probably at least that. I think every time we do one of these, there's going to be more and more in there, isn't there?
Well, absolutely. So, and we work with these types of clients, and that's just a snapshot. So there's lots more that we work with too. So why does it feel scary right now? Well, you've probably come across this term, which I have to say this very carefully, particularly when you're live, which is VUCA or VUCA. And we live in a fascinating world right now. We've got conflicts in the Middle East and the Ukraine. We've got political change and the magnitude that we've never seen before, home and abroad. And we've got businesses reacting to the US trade war. We've got economic challenges. Inflation only yesterday peaked again. And that will lead to some sort of reaction. And all of these create this kind of domino effect that we're all trying to keep up with as we go through. So it's no wonder, like I said, it's probably the hardest time for leaders and managers to work right now, because a decision you make today might look ridiculous either later today or even tomorrow. So we need to be really close to our people. And the stats tell us only one in four trust their leaders to manage effectively. And 83% say that we don't have the tools to manage and handle change. And that's what we are in rapid change right now. So when you look at VUCA, it's about volatility, it's about uncertainty, it's about complexity and ambiguity. Unpredictability. Well, we've seen that certainly over the last 6 months. Unclear, lack of clarity, complexity. These things are all interconnected. So it's like when you push the balloon in, where's it going to come out and on which side? And ambiguous, well, we're working in a world that is absolutely ambiguous, that is unclear, that the decisions we make today are going to be holding fast in terms of tomorrow and beyond. So we need to be really agile in the way that we operate and the way that we think. So we're interested, Graham and I, in terms of what is going on in your world right now that feels VUCA to you. And feel free to share, but don't feel like you need to share anything specific that you might not be comfortable with. But what's going on in your world that you feel like is either volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, or ambiguous? So drop it in the word cloud. You've got the QR code, or you can join at slido.com, and your joining code is TF Webinars. Somebody's joining in. It's always the first one that makes you nervous. Do we get somebody? So it could be anything. It might affect your team. It might be the organization. It might be external to all of that. But, the reality is some of the choices that Mr. Trump has made across the pond, well, that's had a dramatic impact on many of our pension pots. We've seen a big dive in the value of those pensions through no actions of our own. So here we go. We're seeing spending reduced, trade we've talked about, absolutely, restructure and no communication. That's interesting. Decision making slows down, absolutely. And let's be fair, if you were leading a major organization right now, why would you speed up your decision making? Because if you rush to make a decision, actually that decision might be invalid, or even worse, make you look daft by the time you get to implement it. People who might move on, stay put and switch off. What do we call these, Graham? We have a name for these people, don't we?
later on. I think, yeah, I think we'll touch on that, won't we?
These are the corpses, I think, aren't they?
Yes, I think they are, aren't they?
Okay, well, look, thank you for that. And I think, these are the types of things we would have absolutely expected. But of course, there's lots going on in the world. So thank you for taking part in that. I'm going to hand you over to Graham, who's going to talk through how nobody likes change.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. Yeah, and I think, we when we talk about change and organizational change particularly, I think there is this common thread that people don't like it. Now, you get some people go, yeah, I enjoy change. But the reality is, from a change point of view, there are times when we do like change. But that typically is when we feel that we're in control of the change. We're choosing the change. So, for instance, if you're buying a new car or a new house, those kind of changes, whilst it comes with some uncertainty, in terms of the newness around it all, we tend to be pretty happy with those kind of changes. We still will miss a little bit of what we had before. We miss the old place, we miss the old car. There's that little confusion in a new car of where your indicator and your windscreen wipers are and all that kind of stuff. But when people talk about change and being excited by change, it's probably that they're imagining the upside, or they can see the upside, and that is much easier when it's a change that we feel in control with. So for a change like a car or a house, the excitement of the gains outweighs the losses that we might see. Now, with organizational change, that can be trickier. And the challenge is, when we talk about organizational change, what people typically think about is loss. And quite often, organizational change, we worry about, we think about, we're concerned about the loss that we might have. And within an organization, particularly a large organization, you're going to have employees who are facing a whole range of loss in different shapes and different sizes. Some of this, caused by change we might be implementing, some caused by changes in their own world, kind of in their private lives. Some loss will be significant and highly personal. That does tend to be rarer in organizational change. But things like bereavement, as an example. Bereavement is a change, is a loss that every employee, that we all will go through at some stage. With those kind of losses, it's probably worth recognizing, unless we're trained as a counselor, as a manager and a counselor, there's probably not much more we can do than offer the level of support that's appropriate from our side, but encourage people to seek more professional help, more appropriate help. But there'll be other losses going on right now. People will be suffering from financial loss. And that, again, might be partly due to changes in the organization. It might just be to do with changes in the marketplace right now, as Ricky talked about with the financial view of things. But we do need to think about kind of what our position is on where people are losing things, because what it might lead to is a loss in someone's confidence. And what we see, particularly with organizational change, is someone who's been very confidently doing their job for a number of years suddenly becomes less confident because they're having to do new stuff, they're having to do things in a different way. And that can be a challenge because we're used to that person being reliable and dependable. And it might be we need to kind of think about some additional development for them, or some reflective practice, or even some assurance of the things that they are good at. I think the bigger challenge, and I know we find this, Ricky, working with organizations, is some losses perhaps will appear trivial to us as managers, but are really important to the individual. So you might find, let's say there's a change at work, let's say you've relocated, and you have some people complaining about the journey to work because it's different. It's easy for us to dismiss that, but that might be the one thing for the individual that they're struggling with. So whilst it might be having to get a different bus or a different train or get up slightly earlier, we might go, that's nothing really in the grand scheme of things. But that can be, for some people, a thing that they need to think about, because again, there's some loss involved with some of that stuff. And these smaller issues that people perhaps vocalize tend to be masking the larger ones, as it feels safer to moan about small things, whereas asking the bigger questions like, is my job safe with all that's going on, is much more difficult for people. So let's explore this concept of loss a little bit more. We all have a cognitive bias. We suffer from a cognitive bias known as loss aversion. And what loss aversion is means we value loss, whether it's real or perceived, more than we value gain. In other words, we value what we have and we don't want to lose it. So let's play this one out a little bit. So again, you'll see kind of we've got another little interaction for you here. So let's imagine we're going to flick a coin. Heads, you're going to win £10, but tails, you're going to lose £10. Would you take that bet?
So again, back on your Slido. If you had it open before, it should still be open. You should be able to see it on your screen. If not, you can use the QR code or join us at slido.com, #TF webinars. So would you take that bet? Would you bet 10 to win 10? Or lose 10? We've got some votes coming in. That's good.
Yeah.
Let's have a look then. Oh, gone too far. Sorry. So 83% wouldn't take that bet, and there's loss aversion in play, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's 5 out of 6 people that have kind of voted on that. So we've got one person who would. So let's see if that changes a little bit then. So let's up the stakes a little bit. So heads, you're going to win £20. Tails, you're going to lose £10. So there's a bit more in it this time round. And again, on your Slido, who's willing to take that bet?
And if somebody who always goes for tails, we apologise. It's just the way we framed it in terms of the session. So feel free to psychologically flip them in your head if that makes it easier. Right, we've got an additional vote here compared to last time. So, we're starting to get a little bit of a wobble now. We're starting to see a little bit more toes in the water, prepared to take the bet. But still, the incentive is not great enough here.
So let's try one more then, Ricky, shall we?
Let's do one more. So, right, we've got head, you win 50, tails, you lose 10. How about this bet? Would you take this one? Well, people are thinking a little bit more about this one. Oh, everybody's in. We're all in.
Everyone's in, Sam. We're all full house.
And there lies loss aversion. The reward has to significantly outweigh the loss.
I think it's interesting, Ricky, in terms of that first one. I know it's and some people just would maybe go on principle, I wouldn't do this, but with the audience we've got today, we've got the kind of the votes have come in, in terms of the we've completely switched from majority of people being no when it's a like for like thing to the majority of people yes, when it appears that there's a much greater reward for us. And this is a challenge with change, isn't it? That that this loss aversion means we don't want to let go of stuff. But if the reward looks like it's significant, and to go from 10 to 20 is a 100% increase. But as we move up to the kind of the 50, the £50 if you win, suddenly a 500% increase if my maths is right on that, is much more attractive. And this is one of our challenges, isn't it? Is we need to make I know we're going to talk a bit more about this in a moment, but we need to make the future appealing. We need to make it feel for people that there's more in it for them that overcomes the loss that they're going to experience. And part of this is because what happens is in life, our brains look for, therefore we look for, whether we're aware of it or not, we're looking for two things. we do want our life to be black and white. We like things to be certain. If you think about kind of your daily routine, it's based on habits. If you travel, if you commute to work, there's a good chance that you arrive at your bus stop or your train station at pretty much the same time every day. You probably stand, if it's a train you get to work, you probably stand on the same bit of platform every day. You probably park in the same car parking space if you can. We like certainty. So when change happens, we look for the things that feel like it felt before. And also we're looking at looking for meaning. It's a big thing for us as individuals. We search for meaning in life. We're defined by what we do often. So if that changes, who are we now? If there's a change to my job role, and define, just think about when you meet somebody and you ask them what they do, they probably tell you what their job role is or their job title is, and then explain what that actually means. So we get defined by that. So if organizational change happens and there's some change to what I do, it's deeper for individuals in terms of it feels like I'm changing who I am. What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my life? What does it mean for those perhaps outside of work as well? And if we haven't got certainty, we're going to have some concerns. If we haven't got meaning, it increases our sense of uncertainty, which again increases our concerns. So what does that mean for us in terms of successful change, Ricky?
Yeah, just before I do that, Graham, I just wanted to kind of pick up on the meaning piece, because what's interesting is if we in organizational change terms are not clear about why we're going on this journey, you allow your people to make up the narrative that suits them. And the reality is that might not be a narrative that you particularly want. It might not be a narrative that is true, but in the absence of clarity, they'll make it up. And that's what we are doing, not because we're trying to be difficult or problematic. We're fulfilling our need for meaning. So our role when we are looking at change is, how do we do that? How do we provide meaning for people in terms of the journey? We're not looking necessarily for them to like the change, but we are looking for them to understand why we're making the change. And that's where meaning becomes really important. So thank you, Graham. Successful change. As far as we're concerned, we think it needs two components. Clearly, it's a more complex subject than that. But in reality, when you boil it down, we need a high quality plan. And the reality is we do lots of training, lots of investment, particularly around change. There's a whole industry around developing project managers who are there to make sure that the plan is right. The other thing we need acceptance of the change. So we need people to go along with this change. And this is where the planning is relatively easy. We know if we take step A, B, C, D, E, F, I'm not saying they're difficult to, I'm not saying it's not difficult to do, but the steps in principle are easy to work out. But we do need this acceptance of the change by the people that are impacted and affected by this. And that could be a whole group of people, from internal, external, might even include regulators, who knows, but we need to consider who's bought into this and how does that work for us. And the reality is, if you get Q times A and we get that right, so we get a good quality plan, we get great acceptance and engagement in the plan, then the reality is we're likely to get a successful outcome. In other words, we're likely to get an effective execution of what we intended. However, if our planning is good but our engagement is low, then we're going to struggle with low engagement and we're going to get slow adoption. People are going to struggle to go through that change as quickly as we'd like. In the same way, if you've got everybody bought in, everybody exciting, but we execute the plan poorly, actually, you can do more damage, because people who were enthusiastic then go, well, hang on a minute, we were promised these things were going to happen and now they're not. So it can easily lead to disengagement. And of course, it's clearly obvious, a low quality plan and low acceptance is you're probably going to lead to a high cost failure. This is going to be a real problem for you. But I think in the main, most organizations will be playing in the orange and sometimes in the green as well, by the way. So sometimes we do get this right. But these are kind of, have we got these things? This is almost like a little mini checklist, if you like. So when people react to change, you typically find 3 distinct audiences. So you get the resistors on the left here. You get those that want to embrace this and go, where have you been all my life type approach. And then you get the group in the middle. So you've either got blockers and champions, and then the group in the middle are really looking to the leaders, and they're looking to the leaders to see how they're behaving. So if the leaders are spending more time with the blockers, then the perception of that middle group is they're winning. In other words, this change is not going well, this change is not happening, it's not going right. And therefore you will find more people will kind of morph towards this left-hand side. Whereas actually, if we spend more time with the champions, that middle group will see, oh, this is working, this is worthwhile going on. And actually, these champions can become advocates. They can become real agents of change for you and help you to move forward. But the reality is you're always faced with 3 groups. They might not always fit into those percentages equally, but you're always going to have kind of a bell curve in play. So something to look out for. And the journey of change, some of you may well have seen this. You'll have probably come across the change curve. We like the process and transition in particular from John Fisher because it's about a personal journey. And all of us are going to go through these stages at some point or another. What's different is the speed in which we will go through it. It might be different where we get stuck. So I might get stuck at guilt. Graham might get stuck in fear. Or worse, one of us ends up down a rabbit hole of denial or disillusionment, in which case we're going to need some real help to bring us back and continue that journey. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is effectively get you to the bottom of this as quickly as possible, because once we're at the bottom, we can start to turn the corner, move up to gradual acceptance, testing this new environment. Does it work? Is it really as bad in terms of the journey to work? Or actually, I'm not now sat with Graham, I'm sat with Freddie, and Freddie's actually quite nice, and therefore that's okay, before we then start to accelerate and kick into moving forward. So we share this because we're all going to go through this, and we're all going to be at different stages at different times, which means, like we know, people are individuals. And therefore, we need to think about how we help individuals move through any sort of transition. And the other thing to be wary of, it's not a one-way street, by the way. So I can get forward, something happens, and that might push me back. Sorry, Graham, were you going to say?
No, just something came to mind. I remember once being asked, someone once asked me when we were talking about change curves and transition, but does everybody really go through this? Because they quoted somebody who said they don't appear to be going through it. And I think it's, as managers, as leaders, the important thing is to bear in mind, we will go through this in some shape or form, but we might not show it. And therefore, this individual was basically going, well, I don't think so-and-so does go through this because I don't see any of it at work. And my challenge back to them was, well, then if they're not showing it at work, where might they be showing it? And perhaps it's affecting them kind of in their personal lives more than we would imagine. So as managers and leaders, think it's worth bearing in mind that we all go through something that looks like this. We're all going to have a low point, and that will be at different times for different people as well. So you might experience your low point, and I've got through that, and be up on the side of acceptance and moving forward. But others might be struggling to your point, Ricky, to even get down into that dip. And therefore, it's our role to help us get there, using your words, as soon as possible.
And the other thing to be mindful of this is, to your example, Graham, is everything's about timing. So anxiety, the first kind of stop on this line, is where the change is announced. So that causes us to be anxious. Now, leaders and managers are likely to have advance notice. The people making the decisions have already been through this process by the time you're even being told. So you might look at it and go, well, why aren't they reacting? Well, their reaction was probably 3 months, 6 months ago, when the decisions about the change, particularly sizable changes, significant major changes to organizations around structures, around new systems and new processes, they're hitting that wall of anxiety much, much earlier, even before you're even aware of changes in the offing. So it's timing is also something to consider. So it might look like, well, they're not bothered. Well, no, because they've already been through this process months ago. And we kind of call it, we liken it to kind of the marathon effect. So as the fun runners are getting to the line of anxiety, the professional runners are moving forward and beyond. So that's kind of the difference in gap here, depending on the size and scale of the change. Some people might be just one step in front of the manual. That might be your line manager. Whereas actually some of the people making the decisions, they're off onto the next change. And that's why we kind of often feel this fatigue, this change fatigue, and not another change, because they're in the future and you're just dealing with what's happening right now. So that's why this process is really important to recognize. Where are people? How do we help them? And then we move them forward, and we've got different strategies, which we're going to share just some of those in a short while with you. Clearly, if there's any questions as we go through this, fire them into the chat and we'll be happy to pick them up. So let's explore when people react negatively. What does that look like? Well, we are built with 7 basic emotions, and this was studied by a gentleman called Ekman. And if you look at this is just a simple illustration that basically says you've got one positive emotion, happiness, you've got one neutral emotion, which is surprise, and then you've got 5 negative emotions, from sadness, anger, disgust, fear, contempt. When I was building this slide, I wanted to use that Disney characters, but I think I have some licensing issues to use them. But that's a really good illustration of how people react. And we are loaded for negativity. It's the reason why we're here today. And I don't mean on this webinar, I mean as alive and well, is because our ancestors worked out where danger was. They were alert to danger, to threat. And they use that negative bias in order to look and be alert to what was going on around them. And that's why we are here today. So we didn't get eaten by the tigers of the past. So what does that manifest itself in then? So we might be uncertain. Uncertainty is a real trigger for people. If I don't know what's happening, if I don't know why it's happening, it's a real problem for me. That might even cause me to go, well, this is unfair. And the reality is, in change situations, we can't always share all the information. But what we can do is tell them that we can't share that information, and as soon as we can, that we will do. And then that might lead to this loss of control. People feel like that it's been done to me. It's been imposed upon me. I'm now being told I can't do this and I have to do that. And not all of those reactions are going to be true and fair, by the way. Some of them will be made up. Some of them will be me, my team, making sense of this when it's happening. And that might ultimately lead to resistance. So somebody is actively going to block. They're going to want more clarity. They're going to suck up time, because they just don't get it. And therefore, and then you've got the professional resistors, by the way, who actually, don't matter what you do, are going to challenge it, are going to push back, are going to make it difficult. And we need to develop strategies to help all of the people in doing that. And the great news is, Graham is going to walk you through what we can do to help people through some of these changes.
Yeah, so let's move on to look at just that then. So how do we, as managers and leaders, how do we help people through change? Well, we've already talked about some things to bear in mind and to recognise from the emotional point of view, but there are three key things that we recognise we can do to help people when change is occurring, and we use the acronym ICE for this: information, choices, and engagement. So, from an information point of view, what information are we able to share? And we do always need to bear in mind there might be some information that we can't share right now because it's sensitive, it's kind of under a bit of an embargo. But as managers and leaders, what can we share right now that will help people to feel that they're in the loop, to feel they get the information that they need on a regular basis? And information, we recognise it helps to reduce stress and it allows people to plan. And if you saw the stats kind of as we started the webinar today, 41% of people resist change due to mistrust. And from a trust point of view, information, we recognise that regular information and updates of information help build trust. 39% of people, again in those stats from earlier, don't understand why the change is happening. So back to Ricky's point, the why is really important for us. It is part of that search for meaning. Information is not always understanding, by the way. Some people will seek some information out, and what sources are they seeking it from? So the more we can kind of control that in terms of here's the official information, here's what people kind of want and need to know, the better it will be for us and better for us as an organization. Of course, the quickest way to find out what the information people want and need is to ask them. What are their questions? What are the things that they need to know right now? And if we don't fill those gaps, again, as Ricky alluded to, what happens is the grapevine kicks in and people make up stuff and that gets spread. And one of the things often is if there's a hole in the information that we send out, people will fill that hole. And the biggest one we see in organizational change is where there's kind of no obvious discussion about the impact on people will fill that with a worst case scenario, which often leads to, therefore, we'll be getting rid of people. Now, that might not be true at all, but the fact there's a gap in your information means people will fill it. And because of that negativity bias, I like to fill it with the worst case scenario. Choices. What choices can we kind of get people involved with? And sometimes that might be almost like a forced choice. It's this or it's this. But allowing people to make choices and make decisions helps them to feel more engaged and more involved with the change itself. And we mentioned kind of with the house move and the new car. Coping with change is always better when we feel like we're in control. And people feel in control when they've got choice. So helping people to have that. And if there aren't big choices people can make, what are some of the smaller ones? What are some of the things you can delegate? What choices don't you really need to make, but the people in your organization can make? And then engagement, how do we involve people in the change? And if you're part of a large worldwide organization, you can't engage everybody in kind of changes all the time. It would just slow things up too much. But we can form kind of small coalitions. We can form working parties and those kind of things. But what we recognize is where we are involved with open and collaborative change, it transforms your success rate from about 34% up to as much as kind of 58%. So it has a significant impact when we are able to get people engaged in the change. And that's partly because the more we put into something as individuals, the more connected we feel to it, and therefore the more likely we are to want to make it succeed. And part of engagement might be about gaining feedback from people, but always also bear in mind that it needs to be at a level that's appropriate to the ability of the individual. So if you're asking someone to make a really big decision, and that's not part of what they normally do, then they're going to be unable to make it. They like to kind of freeze in their decision-making process. So information, choices, engagement, if you can kind of bear those three things in mind, it can be really helpful in terms of making your change stick and to help with transformation.
Great way to remember this is ICE, isn't it, Graham?
Yeah, it is, yeah. So what we're trying to do, if you remember back to that kind of we talked about loss earlier, one of the things to bear in mind when we're communicating change is what are we talking about? And we often talk about endings. So we talk about what people are having to let go of. Now, from our toss of the coin exercise earlier, what we recognize is people don't like loss. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to offset that sense of loss, the sense of here's the stuff that we won't be doing anymore, with the two things that you see on the screen on the right hand side. So what will be different in the orange box there? Again, quite commonly when we talk about change, we do talk about what's going to be different. We try and paint a picture of the future that's bright, that's bold, that we think people are going to be inspired by. The bit we often miss, though, and can be really helpful in terms of offsetting the stuff that people need to let go of, is we very rarely talk about what's staying the same. And the reality is, for a lot of people in a lot of roles, a lot of what we do stays the same. We're still working for the same organization, predominantly probably still working with the same group of people. Things like still getting paid in the same way, on the same time. So that often there's quite a few of those kind of more basic things that stay the same that we forget to reinforce. So what we're trying to do is to help people to realize that there's some new and some exciting stuff. There's some stuff that will be different, but there's a whole host of stuff that's going to stay the same as well. And if we can, in the green and the orange kind of blocks on the screen, if they can be at least equal to, or ideally offset the stuff that's ending, it helps people move through change much more.
I once worked with a client, and they'd been through a merger, an acquisition, many years, probably 10 plus years before. And they were struggling with change. They were struggling with people embracing the new culture and the environment, even so long after the initial change. They still believed they worked for the former organization. So much so, they would walk round with their mugs, and their mugs had the old branding on. And the reality is, you can keep that mug, but you need to take it home. Because now you work for ABC Co, no longer work for XYZ Co. In fact, if you check your pay slip, it probably has Nuco on the branding on it. So therefore, nobody dealt with the ending of as simple as allowing them to remove the mug, their coffee mug, and take it home. Let's get them new mugs. Let's get them something that embraces the new world, and let's end what has now gone, what has passed. Because if they don't, they'll never let go. And that was evident in this particular client, where the team was still clinging to the past. They still believe they work for the old company. And we see that quite a lot.
Because yeah, sometimes also it's like a small act of defiance as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
This is who I was employed by, and I'm clinging onto it in the mug. And sometimes it's not that. It's not an act of defiance, as you say. It's just that familiarity piece, isn't it, for people?
Yeah, definitely.
So let's then think about how then do we help people. And again, 4 things to consider here. The first one is get the team talking. Let's have some discussion. Let's get people involved. Different team members will have different views about what's happening, but there will also be lots of assumptions and incorrect information out there. And by holding regular discussions with groups of people, what we can do is get the right information out there, and we can cover off some of these things that people are talking about behind closed doors. Again, I remember working with an organization many years ago, and what we often avoid doing is discussing things with people who appear to be negative, because we don't want to deal with conflict. And in this one particular organization, the reality was there was one person who was very vocal negatively about the change. So people would always go, "Oh, don't go and talk to Betty because she's very negative about it." The reality was, when you go and talk to Betty, is the challenge that Betty has is she struggles to articulate what's going on, and therefore appears to be very negative, but has got some really good stuff to say. And by not involving those people in discussions, we lose a massive opportunity. And the reality was, in this particular organization, is Betty was the vocal minority for a silent majority. So there are more people sitting behind Betty who felt like she did, and they were using her as a channel. So engage people with discussions, allow people to talk. and get those people who might appear to be more negative, get them involved with some of that stuff, because that's how we find out what some of the challenges are. What we can then do is assess the impact of the change. And this might be about kind of creating our list of what's the stuff we're going to lose, what's the stuff that we need to let go of, and actually having a conversation around, are these real or are they perceived? So is there evidence that says this is definitely going to be lost? And again, there'll be some things that will be going through change, or is it just stuff that people are worried and concerned about? And actually, again, through some of that discussion piece, we can alleviate some of those fears. And also, people sometimes use the, well, we're going to lose this particular thing, and actually it's a bit of a smokescreen, because we don't really care about the thing that's being lost, and it's probably been annoying us for years, and actually we're secretly quite happy about it. But it's change. You're asking me to change the way I do things. And again, as managers and leaders, what can we do to help people to resolve some of that stuff for themselves, if that's what's needed? And then how do we validate the change? And then again, this might be looking at, let's look at all the stuff that's staying the same. Let's look at all the stuff that's going to be different. It's going to be better. And let's help people kind of validate the change in their own minds. Creating lists can be a really good way of doing this. And having lists of things where you've got a list of the stuff that's better or is staying the same, that's longer than the stuff that we're losing, just makes it much more helpful for people to move forward. You might need to prompt, you might need to help people think about some of the everyday stuff, but validate that the change is going to be good can certainly be useful for people. And the final one, the reframing, is we might need to help people to reframe the change. So particularly if they've been quite negative towards it to start off with, by doing some of the things that we're talking about, we're helping them to reframe it in their mind. How else might we describe the change to people? How else might they describe the change when they're talking to others? What might be a more helpful interpretation for people to have? So we think about ICE, and we think about kind of discuss, validate, assess, validate, and reframe. And the combination of those things can help us move forward. And what we start to think about is getting people to recognize there will be some new beginnings. And when we're thinking about new beginnings, again, a few things to consider. We've talked about the why a couple of times, but starting with why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we going the new way? Why is it required? Clearly define the what we expect going forward. You've got to have clarity for people. If I know why we're doing it and it's really clear what we're doing, you've got a much better chance of me buying into it. We also, though, organizationally need to make sure we've aligned our systems and processes to the new way of working. Because if we don't, there's a phrase that we use a lot, it's that familiarity will trump change if we let it. I worked with one organization many years ago, and they were changing the way they communicated with their stores. It was just a network of stores. And they had an old bag system where stuff would go into bags and would get sent out to stores. And they changed it to use handheld devices, which, was making the best use of technology. But what they hadn't done is they hadn't removed the old bag system. So they hadn't aligned the systems and processes with a new way of working. And they couldn't work out why people weren't using the electronic devices until someone pointed out they could still use the bags. So what people were doing, familiarity trumping change, is they were using the old way of things until somebody took it away. So let's make sure we've aligned things properly to help people to move forward with things. And be consistent with our messages, be consistent with how we act as managers and leaders, consistent with each other and consistent with the new way of doing things. And celebrate successes, celebrate when people are doing the things that you want and need them to do. And these might be big grand gestures of things about big successes we've had, but also recognizing the small things. And that might be on a one-to-one level. You recognize that Graham stopped moaning about his journey to work. There might be some small wins we can kind of celebrate with people. So always start with the why, define the what, have clarity, align things, be consistent, and celebrate stuff as we move forward. Because what happens if we don't, we end up with situations that people aren't happy with. Ricky and I have been using this model for years, and it's a really nice, simple way of going, okay, so if we're not happy about something, 4 things we can consider doing. The first thing is, can we change it? Can we change the situation itself? That's very proactive. It's something that we can be involved with. It's something that we can do to help make things better. So can we change it? If we can't, how do we change ourselves to be part of it? And that might be development, it might be help, it might be support, whatever it might be. So changing ourselves to help to be part of it very positive, proactive things that we can be doing. Now, it doesn't mean it's always going to work, but if we've had it go at doing some of those things, it might be go, do you know what? I need to escape it and I need to move away from this. And what we find going through change is what you won't take everybody with you. And sometimes that's right. There'll be some people who, as part of change, will need to move on to other things. And as managers and leaders, perhaps part of our role is helping them to do that. If, however, they don't want to do that because there's more going on for them, there are more pros than cons to staying with the organization. The final thing then is we need to live with it. And how do we help people to live with this, with the new situation? Again, perhaps it's some of the things that we've talked about. And I recognize I've worked in organizations where I've not been happy with the organization. I've not been happy with perhaps some stuff at senior leadership level within an organization. So I've worked with senior leaders as one myself. I've worked with my colleagues to try and change the situation to make it better, and recognize that's not worked. I've looked at how I might be part of it and recognize at times there's some value stuff in there, and that's not easy to do. And then it's not easy to go, right, I'm off then, because we have a whole host of other responsibilities around it, but you explore that option. And it might be ultimately that you do move on, because moving on is better than trying to live with it and trying to work in an organization that doesn't kind of feel right for you. So it's a really nice, simple kind of model we can use with people. And Rick and I, we use it a lot with coaching, Ricky, particularly, don't we, with this approach, helping people that are stuck with change.
Yeah, this is one of my ultimate favorite models, particularly when you're working with team members. And I've used it, like Graham said, we've probably used this for over 20 odd years. And I like it because it's simple. But more importantly, what I like it for is it puts the individual in control. I'm not telling them which of those 4 options they have to choose. What I am doing is spelling out the implications of each option and each choice. But they're the one making the choice. And what we're really saying is, if you can't make all of those choices, living with it means putting up and shutting up and getting on with it. Because if you're not prepared to do that, then we're going backwards. It doesn't keep going round and round. We're going backwards too. So are you prepared to escape it? And whatever that means. So everybody thinks, oh, I've got to leave then. Well, it might not be that. It might be change teams. It might be change the type of work that you do. But it could mean, actually, because of the changes we've made, this is no longer the right place for you. And that's okay. And we will happily help you to find something that's more you. And that's the key here is, and the reason why it's so powerful is because the individual that you're doing it with is making the choice. Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, thank you. So should we sum up today then?
So let's just kind of think about what we've talked about. We've talked about VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. They are unsettling your people right now. That is undeniable, I would suggest. Change is about loss. We don't like it unless we're the ones picking it. But even if I decide I want to move house, well, his son might not want to move house. He might not want to change schools. He might not want to. So even a change that I feel good with actually might have impacts on people close to me. Look for the clues. Your people, that your people are not brought into this. And that's about looking at the emotions. Their facial expressions are going to give away a lot. But be careful of judging them too quickly. Get curious before you start diving in with a whole host of information and choices and involving them in stuff. Test the water, get curious. Use the tools that we've shared with you to get your people on side. Whether it is about information or it's about giving them some choice, getting them involved in some way, shape or form, or working them through the processes that Graham talked about around, have we got the why? Have we got the what? Is that clear? Are we joining this up and making sure that we're moving forward? We're not making the old system still available whilst trying to implement the new system. And sometimes, like I've said, our model We call it sad face. I think we've nicknamed it Dave. So apologies to any Daves out there, but I think that came up in one of our recent programs.
Yeah, so
Sometimes,
that came from somebody else, not us, didn't it? So
yeah, it did. But sometimes people can't make the change. So we need to help them decide. We need to help them move on. And it's okay. You know, the world is continually moving. You know, even a glass of water that you might leave for an hour, you go, well, that's still the same. Well, the reality is it's not. Entropy means the temperature has changed, that actually some of it may even have evaporated. So therefore it's different. So even simple things are changing in front of our eyes, even though we can't see them always. So let's help people to decide if they want to be a part of it, we're all in. But if they don't, that's also okay. And let's help them to move on in a dignified, helpful way. And that's it. What's open to you guys now is Q&A. What would you like to know? What questions have you got for Graham and I? How can we help you with some of this material, some of this content?
If you've got anything, just drop it in the chat for us, and we'll see it and then we'll respond to it.
One of the things Steve mentioned earlier was it has hints of Simon Sinek. Absolutely. You know, start with why stuff is so important. You know, people don't understand what you do necessarily, but why you do it is a much more powerful narrative. And why helps people to understand. And often the why is made up of, what do we let go of? You know, what are the reasons we've got to move this? Is because actually our competitors are coming in and stealing our market position. They're stealing our customers. So if we don't change, we become obsolete. Actually, we're changing because there's a new market opportunity over here. And we want to seize that market opportunity because we believe it has greater value than some of the things we're doing right now. So all of those things, if you apply that narrative, people might not like it. And this is not about getting people to like it, but it is about getting people to understand why we're making the choices and decisions that we're doing it in the way that we are.
Yeah, I think and if you haven't come across Simon Sinek Golden Circle, it's certainly worth as a TED talk. I think about 18-minute TED talk. So it's not a massively long one, but really powerful for that. You know, so that discussion of the why being at the heart of all we do, then thinking about the how we're going to do it and the what we're going to achieve. So yeah, really worthwhile looking at, and a good shout, Steve. Thank you for that. No more questions popped up, Ricky. I'll keep an eye on it if you want to just share what people can expect in terms of other things from us.
Yeah, so as we do with all of our webinar sessions, we kind of pull together, Graham and I sit down and we go, what would be really useful? Some of which we share in the webinar, and some we add in as a kind of an after effect because we just haven't got the time to cover everything. So there is a toolkit available. Let me share the link and I will absolutely make these available after. So you can access this tool set at the link that you're seeing on the screen. I wonder if I can take that link. Bear with me 1 second. Let me see if I can put that link.
Just while you're doing that, Ricky, Marie has asked a question about thinking back to change fatigue. How do you help people go through changes in an ever-evolving business? I think it's a really interesting one because, as you say, Marie, from the stats earlier, change fatigue is out there. I think it's been out there for a long time, in fairness. I think some of the stuff that we've talked about, you know, the kind of the recognition of what people need in terms of the purpose behind every change, means we as leaders need to be on our toes to always be really clear, because sometimes it does feel like, well, isn't this why we changed to this not so long ago? Why are we changing to something else? So continue reinforcing the why is important. I think the other big thing that I've learned over the years, when people are going through change, is is the challenge, I think, is as leadership teams, typically, we're aware of change curves, but we always think people start at a high point. So we always think they start kind of that top left and they're going to go down a dip. But what change fatigue is really, really telling us is somebody can be on the downward curve for the last change, and we hit them with the next change. So actually, they're not in as good a place as they could be. And I think as managers and leaders, one of the things that to bear in mind with that is it's the individual attention. It's spending time with individuals, which we can't do as a senior leadership team. But what we can do as individual managers and leaders is spending time with our teams. And I think that's, in my opinion, is one of the best things we can do for people to help them with ever evolving change. Is always going back to our overarching purpose as an organization, which essentially is our why, and that is unlikely to be changing. So reinforcing why people work for the organization that they work for, and that individual attention are the two things that I would recommend around that.
Steve's made a comment. Let's share that. Absolutely, Steve. You know, anything where we can connect, the human connection is so important. And I think, you know, when we can treat each other as individuals. I know we're over time now, so Graham and I are around if you have any further questions. I know some of you will be rushing off to your next meeting, and thank you for joining us. If we've got your contact details, we will absolutely be sending out the recording, the slides, and the tool set direct to your inbox. So you know, feel free to stick around if you have a question that you'd like us to cover.
Yeah, thanks everyone for today. Thanks for joining in, and we'll see you hopefully next time when we're also talking change again, Ricky, aren't we?
Yeah, we're moving this up a notch, aren't we, in terms of change leadership, the blueprint for successful change. And we've got 5 kind of steps to share with you around that, all part and parcel of our blueprint. So we would more than welcome to do that. And again, I'll share the link in the email that we send out after with all the information to register for that one.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Ricky. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Steve. Right, we'll call it quits there then. Thank you, everybody.